The economy of moral distance is the systematic normalization of the responsibility gap between profit and outcome. So how is it that a system produces consequences that touch the lives of thousands of people, yet no one feels responsible for those consequences? This question is a decisive key, not only for understanding individual crimes, but for understanding how power, capital, and institutional immunity operate. When history is examined carefully, it becomes clear that the greatest economic transformations have been determined not by technology, but by the way responsibility is distributed, because the morality of a system is hidden within its revenue model. As the distance between profit and outcome grows, the actors operating within the system begin to see themselves merely as executors of technical roles, and at this point moral decisions are transformed into procedures. This mechanism is neither unique to the modern era, nor to technology. It has existed since the earliest stages of financial history and has emerged in the same form each time. Although Adam Smith did not fully name this mechanism, he clearly saw its danger, and for this very reason he characterized the secret meetings of people engaged in the same trade as a potential conspiracy against the public. This warning was directed not only at price agreements, but at the circulation of power within closed loops, because within closed loops, responsibility never rises upward. From this perspective, the Epstein case is not an anomaly, but a modern form of historical continuity, because the core issue here is not individual immorality, but the institutional protection of immorality. When power crosses a certain threshold, it begins to feel itself outside the law, and this feeling is reinforced not only by physical immunity, but also by symbolic immunity. This symbolic immunity creates an invisible shield hidden behind names, titles, foundations, and legal structures, and this shield fragments responsibility. Precisely because of this fragmentation, no one assumes the whole outcome, and everyone claims that they merely performed their small role. One of the earliest and clearest examples of this mechanism in history was the Dutch East India Company, because this institution succeeded in separating profit from consequences geographically, legally, and morally. The mass massacres that took place in the Banda Islands did not enter the daily lives of shareholders in Amsterdam, because those events had been converted into numbers within their world. When blood, land, and human life are encoded as costs and revenues on a balance sheet, brutality ceases to be an ethical problem and becomes a management issue. This transformation was not accidental, because financial instruments were designed not only to create wealth, but also to distance responsibility. For VOC shareholders, the main concern was the security of trade routes and the continuity of dividends, while the fate of local populations became an invisible variable within this model. When Adam Smith described such institutions as blood-soaked monopolies, he was referring precisely to this invisibility, because the most dangerous aspect of monopoly is not its violence, but its ability to normalize violence. This normalization is not possible without the state, because monopolies become sustainable only when combined with state power, and this combination deprives the market of competition. A similar mechanism can be observed in the Epstein case, because here individual behaviors took place within a network of immunity protected by political, financial, and legal connections. This network was built more on silent agreements than on overt violence, and it was precisely this silence that made it dangerous. The meetings Adam Smith feared were not limited to physical spaces. They could form wherever interests intersected, and today these intersections occur on a global scale. As moral distance increases, holders of power begin to feel responsible not for the outcomes of the system, but only for its benefits, and this selective understanding of responsibility structures crime. Within this structure, crime is not an exception, but a byproduct, and as the system operates, this byproduct is reproduced. History shows that such structures begin to collapse not only when they are exposed, but when trust is lost, because legitimacy is an invisible form of capital. As Al-Ghazali emphasized 1,000 years ago, economic systems rest on people's belief in them. And when this belief is damaged, even the strongest institutions are left suspended in a void. The Epstein case damaged precisely this invisible capital, because society saw openly for the first time that laws function differently for some people. This difference creates not only a legal, but a moral fracture, and this fracture leaves marks deeper than economic consequences. In financial history, crises are often explained through numbers, but their true cause is the breakdown of the social contract. When people no longer believe that the system is fair, their motivation to comply with the rules weakens, and this weakening strikes at the market itself. This is also where Adam Smith is most misunderstood, because he emphasized not the ethical neutrality of the market, but its ethical dependence. For the market to function, not only contracts but also trust are required, and trust is protected not by legal mechanisms, but by social norms. When these norms erode, even the most complex regulations cannot keep the system standing. The economy of moral distance accelerates this erosion, because as responsibility moves farther away, conscience also falls silent. This silence may not be felt at the individual level, but when it accumulates at the system level, it turns into a destructive force. The Epstein case is the visible point of this accumulation, but it is not alone, and countless analogues exist throughout history. These analogues show that the problem lies not in specific names, but in specific incentives, and as long as these incentives do not change, the outcomes do not change either. When profit is separated from morality, the system consumes itself, not only economically, but morally as well, and this self-consuming mechanism is sooner or later exposed. History has proven that these exposures are devastating because they call into question not only the past, but the future as well. At this point, history functions not merely as an archive that recalls events, but as a mechanism that reveals the consequences of behaviors in a delayed form, because economic systems punish errors not immediately, but after they have accumulated. The economy of moral distance may appear to function without problems for a long time, because the damage it creates is not immediately measurable. But this damage slowly creates deep cracks in the social fabric. These cracks are first felt at the level of trust, because when people sense that rules do not operate equally for everyone, the invisible contract between them and the system is broken. This rupture changes market behavior because when trust in the rules is lost, the concept of risk also changes, and people begin to seek not long-term stability, but short-term protection strategies. In history, this stage is usually followed by two paths. Either power becomes even more centralized and is maintained by force, or the system begins to fragment from within. In both cases, the core function of the market, mutual trust, is damaged. And this damage produces not only economic, but also political consequences. In the VOC example, this process was clearly observed, because while the wealth created by the company generated a sense of prosperity in Europe, destruction and violence became normalized in colonial geographies. This dual reality was kept separate for a long time because the distance was constructed not only geographically but also in terms of information and responsibility. For an investor in Amsterdam, the Banda Islands were an abstract point on a map, and what happened there was lost between the lines of financial reports. This mechanism of disappearance has taken even more refined forms in the modern era, because digitalization and legal structures allow responsibility to be fragmented even further. From this perspective, the Epstein case is an example that shows not only individual networks, but how the system absorbs responsibility. Here, the main issue is not secrecy, but the normalization of secrecy, because at a certain point, secrecy becomes not security, but a form of privilege. When this privilege is protected by legal loopholes, political connections, and financial instruments, a parallel regime of rules emerges within the system. Within this parallel regime, risk is almost reduced to zero for certain actors, because consequences are either transferred to someone else or rendered entirely invisible. The socialization of risk and the privatization of profit is a model that has been repeated many times in financial history. And each time this model has resulted in a crisis of trust. These crises are not measured only by market collapses, because their true impact is hidden in people's relationship with the system. When people believe that the rules are not fair, they are no longer willing to make personal sacrifices to uphold those rules. At this stage, the economic system loses its legitimacy, and when legitimacy is lost, power can only be maintained through force. One of Adam Smith's deepest fears was precisely this, because he knew that the market cannot function through coercion. The market functions only through consent. Consent, in turn, is built on trust, and once trust is shaken, restoring it is far more difficult than making material investments. For this reason, the most long-lasting destruction in financial history usually follows moral crises. Events like the Epstein case accelerate these crises, because they openly show that even the most protected layers of the system can remain beyond responsibility. This open visibility suddenly brings to light a reality that had been covered up for years, and this exposure creates a social shock effect. History shows that such shocks are rarely limited to a single event. They create a domino effect and lead to the questioning of other hidden structures as well. During this phase of questioning, society begins to reassess not only individuals, but institutions themselves. This reassessment is painful, because it reveals how fragile norms that were long accepted actually are. The economy of moral distance tries to conceal this fragility. But history shows that every concealed structure is eventually exposed more harshly. This process of exposure is neither ideological nor accidental. It is the inevitable result of unchanged economic incentives. When power, secrecy, and irresponsibility coexist for a long time within the same environment, the system loses its ability to self-correct. At this point, change either comes from outside through force or occurs through collapse from within. Historical empires and financial systems, when trapped between these two options, usually make delayed decisions. This delay further enlarges the scale of destruction. The Epstein case has become a symbol of this delayed reaction, because the system long behaved as if it did not know what it knew and did not see what it saw. This behavior is an indicator not only of a legal, but of a cultural problem. When culture does not normalize responsibility, laws alone cannot save the system. This is the bitterest lesson of financial history, because laws are always written after events, while incentives are formed in advance. As long as these incentives do not change, new Epsteins, new VOCs, and new closed loops will continue to emerge.